Secretary General, thank you for your very thoughtful comments. They mirror the discussions that we've been having for the past 2 days here in our annual session. You've kindly agreed to take questions, and this is our opportunity to get information directly from you that we take directly back to our parliaments. To remind everyone of the procedure, I will announce those who've been called on to ask questions in groups of 3 so that you will be prepared. Anyone who would like to ask the Secretary General a question, please let the gentleman know to my left. They'll be keeping track. And please raise your hand so that the staff and the Secretariat can identify you and pass your names on. There will be a 2-minute limit for all questions, and of course we cannot guarantee that everyone will be able to ask their questions. We have just slightly over an hour of where the Secretary General has agreed to take questions. Our first group of 3 will be Ance of Estonia, Ricardo of Spain, and Gilbert from France. Ance, you can begin with your question.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's well known that Russia is increasing and quickly increasing its military power in the western part of the country. NATO response to the Russian war preparations have been approved during the Warsaw Summit last July. For the eastern members of the alliance, I mean Baltic states and Poland, it will be realized by sending 4 NATO battalion task forces into our countries, I mean 1 into each one. The United States has promised to send additionally 1 armored brigade into Poland. But if we compare the balance of power between Russia and Baltic states, it's evident that 3 Baltic states, even with NATO battalions, are not able to create some deterrence and protect themselves appropriate way in case of aggression. The next year budget in Estonia has passed 2 readings in our parliament. Third and last one will be this week. We're going to spend 2.18% from our GDP for increasing our self-defense capability. I know our neighbors are doing the same. But as small countries, we are not able to create significant military power, especially medium and long-range air defense, effective coast defense, navy, to keep open and protected maritime and air communication lines across the Baltic Sea in case of crisis. We need more NATO forces on the ground and in the Baltic Sea. Mr. Secretary General, you are a leader of the NATO. What is your opinion and approach how it will be better to solve security problems in the Baltic area in framework of deterrence? Thank you.
This is a very large room and the acoustics are somewhat difficult. I would like to ask everyone when they do ask their questions to try to be as close to the microphone as possible. We'll turn to Ricardo from Spain.
Thank you, Mr. President. I shall speak in Spanish. Señor Secretario General.
Mr. Secretary General, you said that the EU-NATO relationship is stronger than ever. Friendship has never been as major. 4 EU countries who are also members of NATO are promoting a package of measures to revitalize European defense and to strengthen it, to make it more realistic and more credible. They're providing the EU with strategic autonomy. These 4 countries believe it's necessary to have efficient capacity to plan and conduct operations in the area of defense. Some countries consider this as a threat, that this is a break from the past, from NATO. I think that it's an opportunity, just like you do. How can we overcome that reluctance? Thank you.
Gilbert of France.
Secretary General, I would like to ask a question concerning the collective defense of Europe. As you know, the German and French defense ministers, Madam, took in last September a certain initiative and Fortunately, the Spanish and Italian defense ministers joined that initiative in favor of a strong, robust European defense. It's not a question of creating a European army within the European Union or a question of duplicating what NATO does, but the objective is, on the contrary, to strengthen the collective defense capabilities and the capabilities for projecting stability in Europe. Secretary General, so we are in the presence of an equation which makes the defense, more European defense does not mean less defense by NATO, but a more effective defense, and that is what you said in your remarks. So do you consider that this project is not fully in line with the conclusions of the Warsaw Summit? And could you indicate with us what is, in your opinion, what are, in your opinion, the results that this initiative should aim at achieving?
Thank you so much. Actually, I will start with the two last questions because they are very much interlinked, because they both address the issue of stronger European defense and the debate and discussions and the process inside the European Union now addressing how to strengthen European defense. And I welcome that initiative, I welcome that debate, and I strongly believe that a stronger Europe can contribute to a stronger NATO. And that is also the clear message from the European leaders I have met. The discussion is still going on, but the message is that this is not about creating an alternative to NATO, but this is about strengthening the European pillar inside NATO. That was exactly what, for instance, the German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen recently stated, that this is about creating a stronger European pillar inside NATO. And that is, of course, something I welcome, because NATO, have called for a strong European defense for decades, and that has also been the message from the United States and many other non-EU allies, that Europe has to invest more in defense and strengthen its defenses. The only thing we have to avoid is that when Europe starts to strengthen its defenses, it is done in a way which is complementary to NATO, not competing with NATO. And that has been clearly stated, that that is the aim, to not compete, but to complement. And therefore I welcome that many European leaders have so clearly stated that this is, as you also said, Gilbert from France, that this is not about the European army. This is not about establishing shape-like command structures or about the European Union starting to do collective defense. But it is about strengthening Europe's ability to provide defense as a part of NATO for those 22 allies that are both NATO allies and European Union members at the same time. Let me also add that this is in one way obvious, because we have to remember that especially after Brexit, EU is important, but compared to the rest of NATO, especially when you take into account the United States, of course NATO has capabilities and strength which is not covered by the European Union. 80% of NATO's defense spending will come from non-EU allies after Brexit, 80%. And 3 out of 4 battalions, which we are going to deploy to the eastern part of the alliance, also to the Baltic countries and Poland, will be led by non-EU allies. So it goes in a way of the United Kingdom, also after Brexit, Canada and the United States. So I think it's obvious that we cannot decouple European security from North America, and we cannot decouple the security of the European Union members from the rest of Europe, because there are some European nations which are not member of the European Union, and I regret at least for one of them not being there. But then you have, and they also contribute to the security of Europe. So that was a long answer to 2 questions. Estonia, Ants. I think we have to understand the following, that the 4 battalions, they are important because they are multinational. They are led by Canada, UK, United States and Germany. but they are also then, so there will be support and other nations contributing, so they will be truly multinational battalions in the 3 Baltic countries and Poland. And by being multinational battalions, they are sending a very clear signal that an attack on one ally will trigger the response from the whole alliance. But we don't believe that the battalions is the only element in creating the necessary deterrence and defense for the Baltic countries and Poland and for the rest of the alliance as well. Because there are only one building block in a comprehensive response. We have the 4 battalions, but then we have, and then of course we have national defense forces, like for instance in Estonia, and I welcome that Estonia is one of the countries which are spending already more than 2% of defense. And I know that also Poland is also doing that already, and then the 2 other Baltic countries, Lithuania and Latvia, are very close to meet the 2% target. They will meet it in 2017 or 2018. So the battalions are important, but of course also the home defense forces are important, and they are becoming stronger and stronger in these 3 Baltic countries and in Poland. But then we also have the new small headquarters, the NFIUs, which are not so big, but they are critical for coupling the national home defense forces with the NATO forces, and to plan, exercise, and facilitate reinforcements if needed. And then we are strengthening our ability to reinforce. We have tripled, as President Mike Turner said in his speech, we have tripled the size of the NATO response force to 40,000. And at its core, we have the VJTF, the Spearhead Force, ready to move within days. So if needed, we can reinforce quickly to strengthen our deterrence in the Baltic region. So we have to understand all of this together, and NATO is able and will continue to be able to provide credible deterrence. And as you know, the reason to have a strong defense and the reason to have a credible deterrence is not because we want to fight a war, but it's because we know that credible deterrence is the best way to prevent a war. We don't want to provoke a war, but we know that a firm, credible deterrence is the best way to prevent a war.
Thank you. Our next group of 3 will begin with Julio from Portugal, Ojars from Latvia, and then Koryan of Armenia. Julio, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, President. First of all, I would like to compliment the speech of the Secretary General, and we believe in strong security efforts linked to a strong transatlantic relation. And I could congratulate the Secretary General for his talks with the new administration of the United States in order to went on and deepen this relation in order to prevent our security. I have only 2 questions related, first of all, about the Middle East, and it is how is NATO capacity building efforts in Iraq as part of supporter measure for anti-Daesh campaign, and this is related also to announce a Russian permanent presence in Syria. Is this mean something to the movements of NATO? And last but not least, how NATO responded to the increasing militarization of the Arctic. At least there is a kind of a militarization made by Russia. So what is the response and what is the strategy of NATO about this? Thank you very much.
Ojars.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary General, as you made in your remarks, clearly Europe has to do more to strengthen its contribution to defense and to NATO. But it seems that heretofore EU or European contributions to NATO, and especially the European response to Article 5 after 9/11, has not been sufficiently recognized in the United States. This was particularly noticeable during the presidential election. Can NATO's public diplomacy do more to convince our American friends of Europe's ongoing commitment to NATO, NATO's collective defense? Our strategic communication program is focused on deliberate disinformation on Russia's borderlands, but would you agree that we must also combat inadvertent misinformation about what's happening within NATO in our own countries? Thank you.
Koryan, Armenia.
Secretary General, firstly, on November 18th, at German Marshall Fund, you stated the strategic geographical location of Turkey, bordering Russia in the north and the Black Sea, Georgia, and then bordering Iraq and Syria to the south. Perhaps you missed to mention Armenia as a bordering country. As you know, the border with Armenia has been closed by Turkish government since 1994. This is one of the security challenges in our region. Do you have any plans to raise this issue with Ankara so that to help open the last closed border in free Europe? Secondly, in the light of the political military developments and crisis situation in the Middle East, what is the vision of NATO on stopping the movement of foreign fighters to the Middle East? Free movement of mercenaries from the region forms a potential possibility of emergence of network of foreign fighters that would be difficult to detect and defeat. What's your view on the possible mechanism to stop the flow of foreign fighters and increasing security guarantees for refugees in the Middle East and migrants hosted temporarily in some of frontline states in the region? Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General.
First, on Russia in Syria and Russia in the Arctic, that was two of the questions from Julio. We have seen a significant buildup of Russia in Syria, and we have seen it on land with especially air forces, but also with ground troops, and we have seen it in the territorial waters outside Syria and in the eastern Mediterranean. And we have seen that they have conducted airstrikes again and again against many different targets in Syria, and we have seen that they have used both planes based in Syria, but also missiles from the Caspian Sea, but now also planes from the aircraft carrier group Kuznetsov. So they are using many different capabilities in and around Syria to attack targets in Syria. And they do this together with the Syrian regime. And Syria and the Assad regime, they are responsible for indiscriminate bombing of Aleppo, of other cities in Syria. And we have seen the consequences. Civilians are killed, innocent people are killed, and critical infrastructure such as hospitals are attacked, and the humanitarian tragedy in Syria becomes even worse because we have seen a surge in the air attacks against Aleppo and other cities in Syria. This is something that has to stop because this is only adding to the human suffering in Syria. We all know that it's not easy, but it is the only possible solution to the conflict in Syria is to continue to strive for a political solution, for a negotiated solution. And the first step is a ceasefire, cessation of the hostilities, and the free access and safe access of humanitarian aid to those most affected in Aleppo and in other cities. And then based on that, we need a negotiated, lasting political solution. Because the bombing, which is conducted by the Syrian and the Russian air forces, is just adding to the human suffering in Syria. Then on the Arctic, we have seen some more Russian presence in the Arctic. At the same time, I think it is important to underline that the Arctic is still an area where we have low tensions and where we have a high degree of cooperation between NATO allies like Norway and Denmark and also the United States and Canada with Russia under the umbrella of the Arctic Council, but also bilaterally. There is a lot of cooperation. I know between, for instance, the Norwegian fleet and also the Norwegian armed forces. There is cooperation with the Russian North Fleet and with the Russian military authorities at the Kola Peninsula related to, for instance, search and rescue. And I will very much urge all the NATO allies in the Arctic region to continue to, of course, maintain military presence in the Arctic, but at the same time continue to strive for low tensions and a high degree of cooperation. That is important for all of us, and I think it also illustrates that even in times with high tensions, where tensions are running high as now, we are able to also in some areas have a pragmatic working relationship with Russia, as many NATO allies have with Russia in the high north. Ojas from Latvia. I had the pleasure of speaking to President-elect Donald Trump on Friday, and he expressed very strong support for the NATO alliance. And he expressed a strong commitment on continued strong NATO or US support for the NATO alliance and US support for the security of Europe and collective defense. So I look forward to work with him, and I'm absolutely certain that also with the new administration we will have an administration in the United States which is absolutely committed to the NATO alliance. And he also stated, as he has stated in the election campaign, that he will strengthen further US defense capabilities and increase defense spending. But of course, he also pointed out during the election campaign and in the phone call he and I had on Friday, the importance of increased defense spending among European allies. And that's something I absolutely, what should I say, understand. Because actually all European allies and Canada, we have decided, we have pledged that we will stop the cuts and increase and aim at 2% within a decade. And we were together around the table in Wales in 2014, and we promised the Americans and the others who are already spending 2% that the others will also reach 2%. And we reiterated that pledge in Warsaw in July. So of course we have to deliver. It's very hard to tell the Americans, but also for instance in London and other countries which are spending 2%, that some allies are not going to meet the pledge, are not going to make good on the promises we all made together. So we have to deliver. We have made the pledge, and we are a collective alliance, collective defense. And if we expect the Americans to make good on their promise to defend us, the Europeans, then of course we Europeans have to make good on our pledge to them to have a fairer burden sharing. So that's something we have to work on, all of us, and that's actually a responsibility for you and me to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Our next group of three begins with Zan of Slovenia, Irina of Ukraine, and then Raza of Lithuania. We'll begin with Zan of Slovenia.
Thank you, President. I wanted to raise a question about the necessity of an European army, but since my colleagues from France and Spain already asked that and you highlighted some points in your speech, I withdraw the question. Thank you.
Irina of Ukraine.
Thank you. Good day, esteemed colleagues. Thank you, Secretary General, for your comprehensive description of NATO's present and future policy. Today in Ukraine, in the third anniversary of the Revolution of Dignity, Ukrainians defended their independent European future. And immediately after that, Russia started its aggression, occupied Crimea, undermined stability of the eastern territories of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine allocates 5% of its GDP for defense. We Ukrainians highly appreciate that from the very beginning NATO and NATO Parliamentary Assembly supported Ukraine and continue to do so. It's very important for us. During the last 2 days, we have extensively discussed defense and deterrence in NATO's eastern and southeastern flanks in response to Russian aggression. In this context, I would like to underline again that aggressive Russia is our common security challenge. The better surpassed Ukraine and NATO should unify efforts. Thus, I would like to ask, Ukraine is interested in maximum active partners' role in NATO's future defense on the eastern and southeastern flank, including in the Black Sea as non-member state. Do you see such role for Ukraine?
For our speakers, please remember the acoustics in the room, and please get very close to the microphone. We're going to turn to Raza of Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary General, my question will be on NATO decision-making process in crisis. When we rely on rapid reaction as deterrence, reacting fast in an early phase of crisis is crucial, as it is much more difficult to regain lost territory than not to allow to occupy it. So my question is whether the steps NATO has taken so far to streamline NATO decision-making and to delegate some decisions to NATO military authorities are sufficient in the face of a crisis, or whether we still have some issues that we need to streamline. And another critical aspect, of course, is the speed of the decision-making process in our capitals. Can we be certain that if a crisis arises, there will be no delays caused by national decision-making procedures? Should certain allies take steps to review these proceedings on the national level? Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you. First, I forgot to answer the question from Romania Armenia, yeah? Sorry, yeah? Oh, yeah. Armenia, yes. And then, because the first question was about borders and border issues between Turkey and Armenia. And that's a bilateral issue, so I think it's an issue and something that has to be raised on the bilateral level between Armenia and Turkey. The other question was related to foreign fighters. And NATO is, of course, very concerned and very focused on the challenges and the threats related to homecoming or returning foreign fighters. And that's one of the reasons why we have agreed and decided to do more when it comes to intelligence, improve the way we share and work on intelligence, but also to improve the mechanisms we have when it comes to sharing intelligence, especially related to foreign fighters, because that is a challenge for many NATO allies. And as you know, we have decided to establish a new division inside the NATO headquarters, which is dedicated to intelligence. And there will be a new Assistant Secretary General, which main responsibility will be intelligence, reflecting the increased focus we are now attaching to intelligence, especially related to countering terrorism, and foreign fighters is a part of that. Then Ukraine, Irina, on Ukraine. NATO provides strong political and strong practical support for Ukraine. We provide strong political support, stating again and again that we will never accept the illegal annexation of Crimea, and we continue to support the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Ukraine. We also provide political support for Ukraine when it comes to the Minsk process, and the only way to a peaceful, lasting solution is the full implementation of the Minsk agreements, ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weapons, and safe and full access for the OSCE observers so they can monitor the implementation of the Minsk agreements. And Russia has to stop supporting the separatists in eastern Ukraine. We also provide practical support with our different trust funds, helping build defense institutions, and many NATO allies also provide direct bilateral support, for instance, when it comes to training. And I visited Ukraine last year, where I attended a big exercise on civil disaster management, NATO exercise that was hosted by Ukraine with NATO allies and partner countries. And of course, you asked whether we would do more. Yes, we are constantly looking into what more we can do with Ukraine to strengthen our partnership, to work more with Ukraine. And I met President Poroshenko recently in NATO headquarters, and we are working on the implementation of the substantial package to make sure that we, in many different fields, are stepping up our cooperation and our support for Ukraine. Then Rasa from Lithuania. As you said, we have streamlined our decision-making, and we are also developing the plans, the different kinds of contingency plans we have to make sure that we can make decisions and then rapidly implement plans. And this is, of course, also very closely connected to the increased readiness of NATO. Because, as I said, having tripled the size of the NATO response force and having established a NATO spearhead force, we are able also not only to make decisions and to have the plans, but we also have capabilities which can be used on very short notice. And we are also increasing our situational awareness. We will soon have new drones deployed in Sicily, Alliance ground surveillance drones, and around that the whole system of managing or processing the information that the drones will gather or collect. And all of this better early warning, better intelligence is also helping us to make the right decisions in time, because we are more prepared, we have more time for notice when we have better intelligence and better surveillance, and we are stepping up and delivering concrete results in these areas. Then we are also doing exercises, and that's also a way to improve our decision-making procedures and to challenge and to prepare us also for difficult decisions which have to be made quickly in times of crisis. I would also like to say that we have examples, for instance, related to the military operation in Libya, where NATO was able to make decisions very quickly to take the command and the control of the Libya operation back in 2011. We decided to invoke Article 5 just a few days after the attack on the United States in 2001. And the Aegean activity, which is not a combat operation, we were able to make the decision and to deploy ships in the Aegean, I think it was within 48 hours. So there are different examples on how NATO, in very different tasks and missions, can make quick decisions when needed. Decision-making is key to our deterrence and defense. Thank you.
Our next group of three will begin with Richard from the UK, Oyvind of Norway, and Irakli from Georgia. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. I'm only half joking when I suggest that the questions of these sessions could perhaps first be allocated to delegations from countries that are spending 2% on defense. A matter has been raised with us by commanders at NATO headquarters that people of real caliber are allocated to them from alliance countries, but those commanders are not given the flexibility to use those people as they would wish for the tasks that they are given. Could I ask you to look at this to see whether greater flexibility could be given to commanders to be able to use staff officers sent and in how they're deployed? Thank you, Secretary General, for your plea for actions to meet the aspirations of the Wales Summit for 2% to be spent. To make this easier, greater credibility could be given if the good work that you've done on transparency of NATO's funding and finances could be continued, and we'd like to hear an update from you on this. I know great progress has been made, but we continue to be concerned that greater transparency on the funding, on the finances of NATO continues. And finally, just to say to you that if European countries are looking for examples of how cooperation between European countries in defence matters works, could they look at the arrangement, the Lancaster House Agreement between France and the United Kingdom, which is now deep and resilient, and most importantly, increases the capacity of both countries to operate in the defence field, therefore making our joint investment in defence go further.
Oyvind in Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the Secretary General for an excellent briefing. But I would like you to go a little deeper into the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean and the role of NATO. Russia continues to increase the military footprints in Syria. Civilians are suffering, and now we heard that the last operating hospital in Aleppo are attacked. The Russian military operation in support of the Syrian regime has at many occasions also challenged the Allied operations against ISIL. The buildup of Russia's forces in the area and its capacity for anti-access and area denial could pose a future challenge far into Allied territory. The question is, what measure should be undertaken by NATO in order to address this challenge in the Eastern Mediterranean and NATO's southern border? Thank you.
Irakli, Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary General, thank you for your insightful and comprehensive presentation. Dear colleagues, recent parliamentary elections in Georgia once again underlined the country's democratic maturity. And I am proud to state that the election process in Georgia by all international observation missions was assessed positively. We will remain committed to core values of democracy and continue to be a reliable aspirant country. We are confident that Georgia's integration into European and Euro-Atlantic institutions is on the right track, and we are determined to achieve this goal. Secretary General, as you are aware, Georgia is actively engaged in strategic discussions on the Black Sea security issues. And from your point of view, how this process can contribute to Georgia's resilience, defensibility, and security. And finally, I would like to know that next year, NATO PA spring session will take place in Georgia. And we would be honored to host all of you in Tbilisi, and Mr. Secretary General, you personally. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. First, some responses to the questions from Richard from the United Kingdom. First, on flexibility for NATO commanders to be able to use the different staffs or officers which are assigned to them from different NATO allied countries. Well, you are pointing at an important thing or an important task or issue, and we have decided and we have just started to implement a functional assessment of the NATO command structure, where we actually are looking into how is the NATO command structure functioning today, and is there any need for changes. That will be, in a way, the next step. And of course, this may be one of the elements that can be addressed as part of the process we have just started to address the functional assessment of the NATO command structure. Let me then add on a more personal note that I think that we have to admit the following, that nations very much like to control what they are sending to NATO. And sometimes there is a conflict between efficient, management of the resources and national control. Because if every nation wants maximum control on each officer and each person they are sending to NATO, of course it's not so easy to manage the command structures. So again, I think this is partly what we do at the NATO headquarters, but I think it's also what you do in your different capitals, trying to convince the nations that more flexibility, which will then mean some reduced control from capitals will actually, in the long run, benefit all of us. So I will look into the question of flexibility, but I also in this issue depend on your support addressing or raising this issue in the different capitals, because at the end it has to be capitals that allows us to have more flexibility at NATO headquarters. Then 2%. Also, UK is one of the countries that meet the guideline of 2%. That's of great importance because UK then is able to finance many important capabilities for NATO. But UK is also an example for all the other allies that it is possible to reach the 2% target. And 2% defense spending is an issue I have raised in all my meetings in capitals since I became Secretary General. I continue to do so. I'm encouraged by the fact that we have stopped the cuts, but we have a very, very long way to go, so there's no way we can relax. And I met with prime ministers, I met with defense ministers and foreign ministers, but in some capitals I also asked to meet the Minister of Finance, because the problem is never the Minister of Defense. He or she is always in favor of increased defense spending, and normally also foreign ministers are, and defense ministers, and so on. So I think it is important also to address those who are responsible for the budget, prime ministers and Minister of Finance. And I can tell you that when I was Minister of Finance in Norway back in the 1990s, I was actually responsible for cutting defense spending. And I was quite proud of that because I increased the budget surplus in Norway by cutting defense spending in Norway in the 1990s. But then when I was Prime Minister, I was actually responsible for starting to increase defense spending in Norway after the Russian attack on Georgia, or aggression against Georgia in 2008. And the reason why I tell you this is that in one way it's completely understandable, and I understand because I was part of it myself, that when tensions went down after the Cold War, it was in a way natural that defense spending went down. But when tensions started to increase again, then we have to be able to increase defense spending. So if we cut defense spending when tensions are decreasing, we have to be able to increase defense spending when tensions are increasing. So, and I have done both. I have, as a Norwegian politician, both cut but also increased Norwegian defense spending as a response to changes in the security environment. Then briefly on financial transparency, that is of great importance. We are constantly working on that. All nations are involved. Nations are directly involved in the development, screening, approval and monitoring of all of NATO's spending plans. And on the 4th of May, the North Atlantic Council approved a new set of NATO financial regulations, and the new set of financial regulations govern the financial administration of all NATO bodies, and the aim is to provide even more transparency and involve nations even more, because that is key for the involvement of nations. And when we ask for more funds, of course we have to be transparent. Then very briefly, you mentioned the cooperation between France and UK. And in general, I welcome cooperation between NATO allies, because I think that that can increase the effectiveness and the way we utilize the funds which we allocate to defense. And we have to spend more, but we also have to spend better. And in the speech I gave on Friday, I addressed also the need to do something with the fragmented European defense industry, because the European defense industry is very fragmented, and that adds costs to defense investments in Europe. And I had some examples, and as far as I remember, it is like in the United States they have one armored infantry fighting vehicle, one type. But of course they have many of them. In Europe we have 19 different. In the United States they have 3 different types three different types of naval frigates. In Europe, we have 29. So, of course, this adds a lot to the costs of Europe and defense spending in Europe. So we need more cooperation to reduce costs and get more out of the investments we make in our armed forces. Then Øyvind from Norway on Russia in Syria and how we respond. And all the turmoil in Syria, well, we are responding in many different ways. First, we have increased NATO presence in Turkey. Turkey being the NATO ally, bordering Syria and Iraq, bordering all the turmoil in Iraq and Syria. We have assurance measures. We have AWACS surveillance flights. We have more port visits of NATO ships. And we have also Spain and Italy. They have deployed missile batteries, augmented Turkish air defenses with Patriot batteries and with something called SAMP-T batteries in Turkey. I would like to see more assurance measures from NATO to Turkey as a response to all the instability. And actually, there are some gaps which are not filled. We made the decisions to increase our presence in Turkey. We have implemented some of the measures, but we still have a way to go. So again, I urge you to go back to your capitals and ask whether your nation can do more to fill those gaps. All NATO allies support the US coalition or the counter-ISIL coalition fighting terrorism and ISIL in Syria. And of course, we have increased our situational awareness. We are increasing our maritime presence in the Mediterranean with Sea Guardian. And this is also partly a response to the increased presence of Russia in the area. Then Georgia. Georgia is a very close partner. We have increased NATO's presence in Georgia. We are helping with reforms. We are helping with building security operations. And we have also established the new joint training center. I inaugurated that, I think it was last year. We have the whole North Atlantic Council visited Georgia recently. And I'm very much looking forward to attend the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Georgia next year. I think it is in May. That's just yet another example of how we are working closer together with Georgia as a very close partner. Thank you.
Our next group of three will begin with Han of Netherlands, Iva of the EU will follow, and then Siavush of Azerbaijan. Beginning with Han.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Stoltenberg. My question and my remarks are directed at both the Secretary General as well as to our President. Mr. Stoltenberg, you said that this political body, this assembly that we have now together here in Istanbul, is the political platform for discussion and political views, also differentiating views. And you reminded us, you said, it's a sober reminder that we've seen here with the failed coup attempt, a reminder to all of us how easily democracy can be lost. And I agree with you. Our delegation agrees with you. But from that respect, I think from both the speeches of the President and the Secretary General, we have missed a reminder also to what is happening since the coup. We've all expressed our solidarity with the Turks, the population that was brave enough to take to the streets. We've all expressed our solidarity to members of Parliament that are now incarcerated, but I think that was lacking from both of your speeches. No reference to any of those elements. Democracy also requires a little bit of spine and backbone if you want to stand firm for the values that we all share. We can express our solidarity over and over again, and we have done so extensively. My country, immediately after the coup, all the way up yesterday, putting flowers to the great municipality of Istanbul. But it's also time now that we express our concern for 10 elected members of parliament that are in jail or in house arrest on unclear charges, that there's more journalists in jail in this country than in China. Newspapers are being closed almost on a daily basis, and 100,000 people were put either out of jobs, and many of them are in jail as well. We cannot have free speech muscled, free press being tied, and think that we can still defend the free world. Our delegation regrets very much that from both speeches of the Secretary General and our President, those references were lacking, and I would like them to give the floor or the opportunity to do that right now.
Before we go on to the next speakers, I do want to respond, Han. I don't expect you to have a total recall of my comments, which of course I have in front of me in writing. And as you, at least others will recall, I specifically called out the issues of the concerns that we voiced in all of our hearings concerning the emergency measures, specifically stated our concerns of judicial processes, and specifically stated our concerns that judicial proceedings be based upon public and clear evidentiary findings, and that these were the statements of all of our delegates in all of our hearings and meetings, and that they were also the issues that we challenged the Foreign Minister, the Chief of Staff of Defense, and also the Minister of Justice. So I wouldn't want a mischaracterization of my comments to go without an answer, and I certainly hope that the rest of you recall that I addressed Mr. Erdogan directly when I raised those issues of concern from our body, because I would not want him to have been misunderstanding that our welcome did not come with concerns.
Okay, I'm very happy to give you the opportunity to reiterate that then.
I will then turn to Iva of the EU.
Thank you. Secretary General, here. Okay. Both NATO and EU are confronted with many very real common security challenges. Not only the war zones that are close to our allies' borders, but also threats that have no borders. Blind terrorist attacks, uncontrolled migration and trafficking, refugee crisis, and even cyber attacks. We have indeed to work closer together and control and defend our borders, our people, our democratic values, and as you well mentioned, freedom of speech. I would like to mention that you point out correctly that stronger EU makes a stronger NATO, now more than ever, and thank you for your efforts to work closer with our EU High Representative Mogherini for that. I would also be interested in hearing what is your evaluation of our existing common active operations, and what are the new concrete actions that you might have been planning and developing, notably in the fields of countering hybrid threats, coordinated exercises, cyber and capacity building of our partners, and more specifically, if you could, in the Mediterranean Sea and Syria. Thank you.
Siyavush Azerbaijan.
General Secretary.
Esteemed Secretary General, I will be making my remarks in Turkish. Therefore, I ask that you put the headphones on for interpretation. Thank you very much for your remarks and also responding to questions. There is an important issue today that Russia's invasion has been spoken of, but Armenia has invaded Azerbaijani territory over and over again. Is there any difference between a Russian invasion and an Armenian invasion? Because they're both invasions. And thirdly, you talked about Syria. Today, all the terrorists in Syria are being placed in Azerbaijani soil by Armenia. They're being brought in to our territory, and their support, Armenia's support to terrorism, is known in the entire community, and the participants have witnessed this today and yesterday as well. Armenia is also creating an army, an armed force that is affiliated with Russia, but they're also participants to the NATO PA. You need to choose a side. This invading army, if they create an army with Russia and also come into the NATO PA and sit here and ask you questions, what is your take on this? Armenia spoke against territorial integrity of Ukraine and Georgia. They make claims, territorial claims against Turkey and Georgia, and they've invaded Azerbaijan's territory 20 times.
Time has expired. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you again. First, on the question from Mr. Hahn, the Netherlands. Well, as you stated and as I stated in my speech, the coup attempt in July was a very dangerous and serious attack on democratic institutions in Turkey. They were defended by the people of Turkey, but also by politicians, by members of parliament from all parties. And as I said in my speech, I visited the National Assembly, the Parliament of Turkey, in September, and it made a lasting impression on me to see the damage on the National Assembly caused by the bombing of F-16 during the night of the coup attempt. And of course, we from NATO and I expressed my solidarity with the people of Turkey defending their democratic institutions in July against the coup. And Turkey has the right to prosecute those who are behind, those responsible for the failed coup attempt. I have stated in meetings that, of course, here in Ankara earlier that this has to be done in accordance with the rule of law. And when I met with the leadership in Turkey during my visit in September, they assured me that that would be the case, and they also told me that they would establish close cooperation with the Council of Europe. Because the Council of Europe is the body in Europe which is responsible for the Convention on Human Rights, and I welcome the cooperation and the contact that has been established between the Council of Europe and Turkey in the aftermath of the failed coup. Working with the Council of Europe to ensure that the rule of law is implemented in accordance with the convention is something I think is important and something I welcome. And I have spoken several times with the Secretary General of the Council of Europe. I spoke with him yesterday, and he confirmed that they are in close contact with Turkey, working with them and addressing how the process after the coup attempt can be conducted in a way which is in accordance with the rule of law and which is in accordance with the European Convention on Human Rights. So I would like to see this cooperation continuing, because I think that's an important tool to address the importance of the rule of law and human rights in the wake of the failed coup attempt. And I will continue to stay in contact with the Council of Europe on these issues. Yeah, and also actually in my speech, I also underlined that I personally attach great importance to the core values of NATO, which are democracy, rule of law, and individual liberty. And since the Council of Europe is responsible for the Convention on Human Rights, I think that's a good platform for addressing exactly those issues, and I welcome the cooperation between Turkey and the Council of Europe on these issues. Then Eva, on cooperation with the European Union. As you raised many different issues, but let me just briefly underline that, yes, stronger Europe is good for NATO. 22 European Union members are also members of NATO, and of course, stronger defense in these countries will contribute to stronger NATO. At the same time, I have underlined it again and again that, of course, it is important how this is done, because we should avoid a situation where we see that there are investments in parallel structures or competing structures, for instance, command structures, which are competing with NATO. That will be unnecessary duplication. And therefore, I welcome very much that it has been clearly stated from the EU that this is not about building command structures which are competing with the NATO command structures. And that will be, in a way, meaningless, because then we will start to compete with ourselves. Because since 22 NATO allies are also EU members, competition between NATO and the European Union is absolutely unnecessary, because that will be to compete with ourselves. And second, this is not about building a European army, and this is not about EU starting to do collective defense. But based on this, and also based on that this is done in a transparent and an inclusive way with non-EU allies, I welcome. And this has been clearly stated from EU, and I also welcome the very close cooperation between my staff and the staff of the European Union and Federica Mogherini, and the personal involvement I and Mogherini have together, and also the cooperation I have with the Presidents Tusk and Juncker on exactly these issues. So I'm confident that we can do this in a good way for EU, for Europe, and for NATO, and that's what we are working on now. And that will be on many different issues, but including on hybrid threats, cyber. We are increasing our presence in the Central Mediterranean, so we will start to also support the Operation Sophia and so on. And High Representative Federica Mogherini and I, we will present a long list of concrete proposals by December, both to the European Union and to NATO, so we can agree on a practical way to expand our cooperation. This cooperation will be based on the principles which are long time established for NATO-EU cooperation. It will not change anything about related to the integrity and the autonomy of NATO and the European Union, and it will be in full respect of non-EU allies. And coming from Norway, which is a non-EU ally, of course I attach great importance to that we respect also the interests of those NATO members that are not members of the European Union. Then on Armenia and Azerbaijan, I have stated clearly that NATO do not play a role in the negotiations aiming at solving the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. We are supporting the efforts in the OSCE framework, the Minsk group, to address this conflict. We take interest in this process and encourage all sides to continue their efforts to aim at a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Peaceful resolution of conflicts is a core value for NATO, and it's one of the core commitments that all partner countries commit to when joining the PFP, and NATO will continue to support the Minsk group process. NATO-Armenia relations and NATO-Azerbaijan relations should not be conditioned on the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. So this is the NATO position, and then we will continue to support the efforts to find a solution within the OSCE framework.
Our next series of questioners will begin with Lorenzo from Italy, Omar from Israel, and then Osman from Turkey. We'll begin with Lorenzo.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Secretary General, one of the problems where our country is most involved in recent years is having to face the refugee crisis and relief operations inside the Mediterranean. This year, we will have been assessed 170,000 people. There have been more than 5,000 dead in our Mediterranean. Our Navy and our Coast Guard are very active in this area. And we also express our appreciation for the support operations to the EU operations with the Sea Guardian. In recent months, we sent 300 personnel to set up a field hospital in Libya and to provide medical assistance to the Libyan forces. Obviously, one fundamental point is to consolidate the new Libyan government. There are different positions on the part of some countries in this area. It's equally important for NATO to become an actor in this area in order to ensure that the Libyan government is united and therefore consolidate the formation of a stable Libyan government. So I'd like to ask you to do what you intend to do in the coming months in order to guarantee greater strength and consolidation and unity to the European government. Thank you.
Omar of Israel.
Secretary General, you talked about the importance of deterrence and the measures NATO is taking. I have two questions. First, we are experiencing the brutal expansion of Daesh in the Middle East. Daesh took hold on large areas in Iraq and Syria, but endangers additional regimes in moderate countries such as Lebanon and Jordan. Does NATO take such potential threats into consideration to assist such countries if needed? The second question, we are experiencing as well the acceleration and increase of Russian presence in Syria, among others, building air and marine Russian bases there. Apart from strengthening the presence of NATO in Turkey, which you already mentioned, is NATO considering, in order to deter Russia, to strengthen its presence in Lebanon and Jordan? Thank you.
Osman of Turkey.
Teşekkür ederim Başkan. Sayın Genel Sekreter. NATO Genel Kurulu'nun İstanbul'a yapılmasından dolayı büyük mutluluk duyduğumuzu ifade etmek istiyorum.
I'd like to iterate that I take great pleasure in having hosted the NATO PA General Assembly in Istanbul, and Mr. Secretary General came to Ankara in September and made consultations about the coup attempt of July 15th, and for that reason I'd like to thank him personally. He's had meetings with all political parties in the Assembly, and I accompanied him. And availing myself of this opportunity, I'd like to thank the NATO for supporting us in our struggle against terror. My comment would be about, it would be a response rather to the head of delegation from the Netherlands' remark about journalists in prison. The duty of members of parliament is to serve the people and promulgate laws in the Assembly. An MP's, a member of parliament's task is not to assist terrorists or propagate for terrorists. It's not to traffic arms to them or to call on them for an uprisal. No parliamentarian is above the law. Everything that is being conducted here is being done so within the frame of the Constitution and law. No parliamentarian can say that they do not recognize the laws of that country or that they won't give statements to those judges or not accept the ruling of those courts. If these were to occur in your country, what would your assessment be for these members of parliament? No one is above the laws of the country, as is no member of parliament. Right now, those called in for a statement, including the head of the main opposition party, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, Mr. Bahçeli, and other MPs have all given their statements. These members of parliament have expressed that they do not recognize the laws of this country. That is why the necessary adjudication within the frame of law is what they will be facing. A duty of a member of parliament is to serve the people that has elected them. It's not to propagate for terrorism or call for an uprising. That's why the files pertaining to them need to be examined well. One needs to know what they're being charged with well before taking the floor. There have been those who have been released after their statements. When a member of parliament attends the funeral of a terrorist that kills your people in your country, what would you do? What would be the people's reaction? That is what you need to understand. All the actions taken after the failed coup attempt of July 15th is within the frame of the law. And what we've seen in the remarks here, we've listened to your criticisms and we will make the necessary consultations with the relevant ministers and the National Assembly as well in light of those comments.
Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. First, to Lorenzo from Italy, who asked about the refugee crisis. And first of all, I think we all have to remember that this is really a profound humanitarian tragedy. And people lose their lives trying to cross the Mediterranean. And we have seen a record high number of people losing their lives in this year. So I think we have to remember that this is an ongoing tragedy. The response to this tragedy requires a wide range of measures. And of course, NATO do not possess all the tools. Many of them are about economic tools, diplomatic tools, political tools. So this is a responsibility for the whole international community, and especially, of course, the countries in Europe which are most affected. But NATO is working together with other international organizations, especially the European Union, in addressing the refugee crisis in different ways. First of all, we help to address the root causes. And when NATO is so focused on what we call projecting stability, to stabilize countries in our neighborhood, that is also important for addressing the root causes of the refugee and migrant crisis. So our presence in Afghanistan is a way to address root causes, to help stabilize Afghanistan. But for instance, when we work with other countries in the Mediterranean region and the Middle East, that is also about addressing the root causes. So, for instance, when we work with Iraq, a partner nation, in fighting ISIL, training Iraqi officers, that's also one of many ways to try to stabilize the region and thereby also reducing the number of people that are forced to flee their country. We have increased our presence in the Mediterranean. We have our presence in the Aegean Sea, which I think has been a successful contribution to cutting the lines of illegal migration. We have seen the numbers of illegal crossings of the Aegean has gone dramatically down. and NATO is playing a key role, providing practical support to the Greek and the Turkish Coast Guard and Frontex. And now we are also deploying assets, capabilities to the Central Mediterranean in support of the EU Operation Sophia. So I believe that we can do more, but we are already stepping up our efforts in different fields related to the migrant and refugee crisis. Then Umar from Israel, we are not doing much in Lebanon, but we are very present in Jordan. Jordan is one of our close partners. We support Jordan in different ways. Through our partnership with them, we help build defense institutions, we train, we have defense capacity building measures. And the whole idea is that Jordan is a kind of island of stability in a sea of instability. And I strongly believe it is important to support Jordan now and prevent Jordan also experiencing more difficulties. So prevention is much better than intervention. And that's the reason why I think it's important in general to support countries in North Africa and the Middle East, which are stable, to prevent them moving into more dangerous waters and become unstable states themselves. So we will continue to work with Jordan, and Jordan is also contributing to different NATO operations and missions. And we are also working in fighting terrorism and Daesh in many different ways by supporting the efforts of the counter-ISIL coalition and by building local capacity, training local forces in different countries in the region, because I believe that's the most efficient tool in the fight against extremism and terrorism. Then Osman from Turkey. Well, as you said, we met in September, and you made it possible for me to visit the Parliament. And as I've already stated, that has made a lasting impression on me to see the damage caused by the failed coup, the bombing and the shelling of the Parliament, and also saw damage on other government buildings. And that was a stark reminder of how serious this failed coup attempt was. But I would also like to underline that it was during that visit in September that you informed me, and the Turkish leadership informed me, that they are establishing, and they have established, a cooperation with the Council of Europe addressing the issue of rule of law and the European Convention on Human Rights. And I welcome that, and I have been in contact with Torbjørn Jagland, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, and he has assured me that they are working closely with Turkey on these issues, and I think that is of great importance. Thank you.
We're coming to an end, so we're going to ask that each of the next questioners limit their time to 1 minute so that Secretary General can be on schedule. The first questioner will be Mike from the UK, Mohammed from Algeria, and Rob from the United States. Mike, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question relates to Russia and the way in which Russia is exploiting the internal divisions both between our member states and also interfering in our internal election processes. What measures is NATO collectively going to take to deal with cyber warfare and the way in which Russia is exploiting technologies and new ways of undermining us? And in that context, isn't it time we also made absolutely clear that Article 5 is a serious commitment and that all our political leaders on both sides of the Atlantic should understand what Article 5 means?
Mohammed, Algeria.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, la stratégie de l'OTAN.
Mr. Secretary General, NATO's strategy to fight against Daesh in Libya. What should NATO do to also protect Libya's neighbors in maintaining peace on their soil? Thank you.
Rob, the United States.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say to our colleague, Mr. Turner, thank you for your term as president, for what you have done for this assembly. We're very proud of your efforts on our behalf, and for the Secretary General, thank you for what you are doing for NATO. We're very proud of the efforts that you are putting forward there. I think everyone here is aware that there is a very real concern in the United States, including our Congress, about the strength and durability of European allies' contribution to these particular efforts. Mr. Secretary General, as you know, the U.S. is continuing to enhance its commitments to deterrence in Europe, chiefly through the European Reassurance Initiative. We are well aware of the very important European contributions thus far, but I would just like to underscore the importance that these continue and become stronger as time goes on, especially given the differing viewpoints of the threat posed by Russia. Mr. Secretary General, how confident are you in the sustainability of unified deterrence efforts over the long term?
Secretary General.
Let me start with the last question, and I am very confident because we have seen again and again that NATO is able to adapt. For 40 years, NATO was focused on collective defense during the Cold War, from 1949 to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Our main task was to counter, to balance, and to respond to the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. And then, after the end of the Cold War, people started to ask, do we need NATO anymore? Is there any relevance of an alliance which was established to respond to the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact after the end of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact? And we saw that NATO was able to adapt and to respond to a very different world. And we saw the importance of project stability beyond our borders, and we started to do that in the Balkans, helped to end the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also to stop the atrocities against people in Kosovo. And then we went into Afghanistan, and we have played a key role in managing crisis and projecting stability in our neighborhood. Then, after 2014 and the Russian aggression against Ukraine, we have adapted again. And now we do both collective defense in Europe and we manage crisis and project stability beyond our borders. And we do both tasks at the same time. And we have also proven that, well, we have a long way to go when it comes to defense spending, but after years of decline, we have turned the corner and started to increase as a response to a changed and more demanding security environment. So I am quite optimistic when it comes to NATO's ability to adapt, because we have been able to do that again and again throughout history in response to a changing security environment. When the world changes, NATO is changing. And there are differences, there are different views. We represent different nations, different cultures, different political traditions. But again and again and again, we have proven that we are able to come together and agree on what matters for NATO, and that is our will and our commitment to defend each other, and that's great to see. And I very much welcome the very strong statement also from President-elect Donald Trump that he will be committed to European security and to NATO and to Article 5. As I stated many times, my responsibility is then to make sure that those allies who are not investing enough in defense step up and do that. And I have already stated how much importance I attach to that issue. So I am optimistic. NATO will continue to deliver deterrence and defense and collective defense. Then Algeria, on what NATO does to stabilize the neighbors of Libya. Well, first of all, we have some very close allies, partners in the region. We have something called the Mediterranean Dialogue, where we have partners throughout North Africa, including Algiers and Tunisia. And we are working especially close with Tunisia. We have started different programs there to help them improve their special operation forces. We have helped them to develop intelligence services, and we also work with the other countries in the region to help them strengthen their defense capabilities, and we will continue to work with them both in a political dialogue, but also as part of defense capacity building efforts with many countries in the region. So we are focused on what we can do and NATO allies can do to stabilize and to support neighbors of Libya. Then Mike asked me about Russia and Russia's interference in NATO allied countries. We have seen increased presence of Russia in many different ways in different NATO allied countries. We have seen them conducting propaganda, and we are aware of that. We see it. And my answer is that our response to propaganda is not propaganda, but our response to propaganda is facts, because we believe that in the long run the truth will prevail. So we are increasing our cooperation. We are increasing our work when it comes to strategic communications. That's a NATO responsibility, but of course, most of all, it is a responsibility for the different NATO allied countries to counter and to take part in debate and discussions, countering false accusations and statements from Russia and Russia-inspired institutions and organizations. But we should always be, very clear on the message that we believe that open democratic societies are more resilient, are able to resist propaganda from other countries. We should never limit the scope and the room for open democratic debate, because that is actually the key to our resilience, and that's one of the core values we are defending. On cyber, we have seen many or several NATO allies reporting about cyber attacks. And for instance, the United States have stated clearly that they deem that this is, or assess that this is, that Russia is behind. And we take this very seriously. Again, the first responder is the different nations. But NATO is helping to improve our cyber defenses. We are doing that in many different ways. We are developing the cooperation. We have made a decision at the Warsaw Summit to have a cyber defense pledge, which is a roadmap, different concrete measures to strengthen the cyber defenses. And NATO is, of course, focused on how we can defend our own cyber networks, but also how we can help nations which are under a cyber attack to defend their networks and their systems. Of course, so we have teams which are ready to be deployed on short notice to help respond to cyber attacks. Cyber attacks is something we take very seriously. We decided also at the Warsaw Summit to establish cyber as a domain in line with air, sea, land and cyber, because this is something which we have to understand is an integrated part of almost any conflict now and in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General, I want to thank you for taking our questions. Our time with you has come to a close. We appreciate your making yourself available to the Assembly and your close work and your work in NATO to strengthen all of our security. Thank you.